Governor Polis, thank you for joining us from Colorado. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Washington, and we're looking forward to having a hard-hitting 20-minute conversation with you. So the subject of today's conversation is building the future U.S. manufacturing workforce. I want to set this scene a little bit from a bird's eye view. In 1980, the United States had about 20 million manufacturing workers, a little more than 19 million, and about 1 in 5 of those workers worked in the manufacturing sector. Today, it's about 13 million people working in manufacturing, and about 8% of the workforce, 1 in 13 people, is in the manufacturing sector. When we hear politicians talking about rebuilding American manufacturing and bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S., are they overpromising in an era when manufacturing is just not as big a part of the U.S. economy as it used to be?
Thanks, John. Great question. Pleasure to be with you today. You know, the manufacturing jobs that you're talking about aren't the same manufacturing jobs that they were 50 years ago. I mean, think about sort of the stereotypical job 50 years ago. It's attaching a widget on a supply line. The next person attaches the next part, the next part. There might be a few of those out there still, but largely when something is labor intense in that sense, it's not usually most efficient for it to occur here. What we have seen growth in Colorado and nationally, and where that promise of good paying jobs is here for now and in the future, is what we might call advanced manufacturing, right? So think about manufacturing that occurs under the incentives from the CHIPS Act. Look at Colorado's booming aerospace industry, right? Aerospace, yes, has people that design things on paper, on computers, but it also has a lot of people putting things together, whether they're lunar modules or whether they're weapon systems for the US military. So these kinds of advanced manufacturing jobs are a very real part of America's economy today and will be a significant part of America's economy in the future as well.
Well, so you're talking about advanced manufacturing jobs. It's a different kind of job than we had 40 years ago. Can we expect the manufacturing sector to be the backbone then of a middle class if we're talking about a much more discrete kind of work than we had back in the 1980s or 1970s?
Well, there's many more jobs associated with manufacturing, right? So it's not the person on the line putting them together. There's obviously a lot of mechanization, a lot of automation. But guess what? Every one of those machines also has to be built by somebody, maintained by somebody. There's a lot of jobs in distribution side, just-in-time ordering, of course. So you're no longer necessarily making 10,000 of the same widget. You're making each one a variant, which needs its own logistics supply chain. You see the jobs booming in sectors that are manufacturing adjacent, for instance, Amazon and warehousing. So lots of great opportunities. It's not going to look, nor should it look, exactly like it did 50 years ago. But the good news is there's a lot of good paying jobs out there, and there will be in the future as well.
So when you think about the Colorado workforce, I use these numbers, 8%, 1 out of every 13 jobs is in manufacturing right now. In order to have kind of a healthy, flourishing population with a robust middle class, how do you see the manufacturing sector fitting into that? Should that be 8% of the workforce? Should it be 20% of the workforce? We have 13 million manufacturing jobs in the United States right now. Is it going to go back to 20 million? Or are we stuck at 13 million? How do you see it fitting into what your labor force is going to look like 5, 10 years?
So look, there's again a broader scope of jobs, and the type of jobs that, for instance, you don't need any particular skills or training for is dwindling. So a lot of these new and advanced manufacturing jobs doesn't mean you need a college degree by any means, but it means you need some kind of skill or training that is not in itself inherently included in a high school diploma. And so we've really focused on how do we get people those skills. So we have a couple thousand apprentices in high school, but not all in manufacturing, but a big part of them are. How do we make sure that we have meaningful programs at our community colleges to get people the skills they need, for instance, for manufacturing in the aerospace industry, the microchip industry, and many others. Again, there's no, whatever the market dictates in terms of percentage, but it's a broader sector than it was, but it also requires more skills beyond just the basic skills you learn in high school to be able to succeed in this sector and earn a good living.
So tell us what you're seeing on the ground now. There's a lot of money coming into this system from the CHIPS Act, from the Inflation Reduction Act going into green energy and high tech. What's the economy look like in Colorado? What does the job market look like in Colorado?
Well, first, it's very strong. Manufacturing companies are hiring, and a lot of our efforts on the public side have been how do we get people the skills they need to thrive in that sector? Because we have a lower unemployment rate than the national average. It's fairly low nationally as well. We have about 1.8 job openings for every unemployed person. But the people who are looking for jobs don't always have the skills to fill those jobs. And that includes, as a piece of that, the advanced manufacturing jobs that are scaling up. So we've really focused on how do we use this whole constellation of things that we have in human capital, community colleges, schools, workforce training centers, to better be able to get people. Usually these are folks with high school degrees. Sometimes they're folks with associate's or bachelor's degrees in a different field, right? But they don't have necessarily the skills to be in advanced manufacturing. But the demand is enormous, John. The demand is very strong. It's really a question of how we can better prepare people for success in these growing sectors.
So whenever we talk about manufacturing, we have these conversations about training and retraining. So a large part of the American workforce over the last 25 years has been through this period of really intense disruption, right? From automation and also from trade. The federal government had programs that were meant to retrain workers. Trade adjustment assistance was one example. The results from those programs, I would say, have been mixed at best, according to many academic studies. Community colleges were meant to be a bridge to retrain a workforce, but a lot of people, frankly, who I wrote about in years at the Wall Street Journal, struggled trying to retrain middle-aged men who weren't ready to go back to school. When we talk about training a workforce for a modern manufacturing age, what needs to change? What did you learn from the last 20 years that didn't work, and what did you learn that did work and that needs to be improved upon?
Sure. So, and I'm not sure I necessarily have the span of the full 20 years. For a large part of that, I was in Congress, maybe a different vantage point, but I certainly have the, last 6 years as a state and perhaps as an observer. And we see this in many ways. For instance, not manufacturing per se, but we're putting a lot of effort into the transition from our coal plants, which are all going to be closed by 2030. We've already had several closures. Coal is the highest cost form of power on the grid. And we're looking at how the skills that people have can apply to other sectors, whether they're in energy or whether they're in advanced manufacturing. We are finding that. Again, nothing happens fast. So this is not like there's 1 year where people in manufacturing lose their jobs and suddenly you have to worry about it. This has been gradual over decades, and there's been different paths for different people, right? Some people might have 20 some years in, be in their 50s, company goes out of business, maybe they retire a few years earlier than they had otherwise planned. Others decide, hey, I'm going back to community college to get an associate's degree in another field that allows me to be able to get a good job. So there's not one path, and it's not all of a sudden. Certainly as policymakers, we've been very focused on what we have the most impact over, which is generally young people in the schools. And so we've had a number of innovation centers, high-tech training centers, St. Vrain Innovation Center, these are school districts in our state, where in the last roughly decade, they've established centers which are kind of the new type of what you might have 50 years ago thought of like as a voc tech center for high school. And yes, there's still some kids that are doing, whether it's hairstyling or car mechanics, that's still there. It's going to be there in the future. It's not going away. But the whole new side is how do you prepare kids, with drone repair, and they have that at the schools, or aviation, and all these different sectors where they're actually getting meaningful skills that make them employable right in high school, whether they then go on to become engineers in college or they just get a job right after high school. Either way, they're prepared for success.
Now, we have a presidential campaign with two starkly different views on how tariffs play into the U.S. manufacturing story. Tell us your view on whether tariffs are part of a solution or part of a problem to rebuilding the American manufacturing base.
Well, unequivocally, tariffs are a complete disaster for the United States. They're a disaster for consumers, first of all, because they lead to a corresponding increase in prices. I mean, when Donald Trump talks about a 20% tariff, that's effectively a 20% sales tax on everything I'm wearing, everything a parent buys for their kids back to school, backpacks, clothes, all of that. And what it doesn't even take into account, John, is the damage it'll do to American advanced manufacturing through retaliatory tariffs. Nothing is in a vacuum. America just doesn't say we're putting a 20% tariff on everything, and the rest of the country says no problem. The rest of the world says no problem. There will be enormous number of retaliatory tariffs that will destroy American manufacturing jobs that are exported, including in the high tech sector. So Donald Trump's tariff plan unequivocally a disaster for the economy. Experience bears that out. Economic theory bears that out, whether you're on the left or the right. And it's very clear we should be engaging with expanding the market for Made in America products across the world. And that's what Kamala Harris will do.
Well, I mean, we went through a round of tariffs during President Trump's first term from 2016 to 2020. The economy didn't fall apart. It kept growing. Manufacturing employment actually grew a bit. There were a lot of predictions that it was going to be a disaster. COVID was certainly a disaster, but it doesn't look like the tariffs were. So why should we think that a new round of tariffs would be a problem for the economy?
This proposal is very different. There was a very small subsector of imports that were subject to the tariffs. Now, China is a special case for geopolitical reasons, obviously on sensitive technologies, on military technologies. There's an important discussion to be had about how we need to friendshore. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the United States, whether it's Europe or Canada. But if you look at the relatively small amount of tariffs that were even talked about or applied, they were very targeted, both for Europe and for China. And these are abroad, across the board, 20% tariffs, the likes of which our country has not seen since the days of Smoot-Hawley.
So I can't let you go without talking a little bit about how immigration fits into this. Obviously, Aurora, Colorado, has been the subject of a lot of debate on the Republican side. Tell us what you see happening. Well, tell us whether increased immigration in Colorado has been a net benefit or a net detriment to the local economy.
Well, generally speaking, when you have young people who are workers who are filling jobs that are open, that's a good thing. America is really missing out on a huge immigration opportunity. I remember, and I hope it's still running around the halls of Congress, but I used to be a sponsor of something called the Staples Act, which, when a foreign national comes to one of our universities, graduates with a advanced degree in aerospace or, in mechanical engineering, we should effectively staple a green card to that diploma rather than subsidize that work in another country. So we're giving up an enormous opportunity by not giving highly qualified folks who come through our schools the opportunity to deploy their talents here. America still attracts the best and hardest working people from across the world. That is an enormous asset. The places with the real immigration problem are the places that people are fleeing, like Venezuela, because of the socialist dictator Maduro. But of course, we need to do this in a legal way rather than a way that people cross illegally across the border. And that's why, of course, border security needs to be front and center, along with a pathway to make sure the people that we want here that will make our economy and our country stronger are able to deploy their talents legally.
All right, so we're beaming you into Washington. What do you have to say to President Trump about life in Aurora, Colorado right now? He was just there last week. He said it's a disaster.
Well, thankfully, he's the former president. Hopefully not again. Yeah, he's spreading a lot of misinformation about Colorado, one of Colorado's great cities, Aurora. The Republican mayor of that city and has said that this doesn't even resemble what's going on there. I'm in Aurora all the time. It's our third biggest city, over 400,000 people. If you've flown into Denver International Airport, that's Aurora, right around that airport. Great city. We have enormous. We just celebrated another 1,000-person manufacturing company moving to that city just a few weeks ago. We did the ribbon cutting. So great place to live, to work, to raise a family. The crime's gone down the last 2 years, and the Aurora that he talks about is not even recognizable in the eyes of Coloradans.
So, last question: if we can make you president for a day, what would be the one thing you would do here in Washington to help rebuild America's workforce?
Well, I mean, look, it's not a one-day job, John. There's not a silver bullet. I mean, I think a lot of things that are happening at the state and local level, scaling up apprenticeships, dual and concurrent enrollment. We now have a majority of kids that are in high school that graduate with some transferable and aligned higher education credit. We have entire high schools, Colorado early college charter schools, an example, over 3,000 kids. Every kid graduates high school with an associate's degree, ready for the workforce. If they want to go to a four-year university, they only need 2.5 more years to complete. So there's not one silver bullet, John. There's many things the federal government can help by being a disruptor and helping with the innovation that's already occurring, scaling it up, and then changing what isn't working as well across our state, across our country.
Governor, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, John.